Hey guys, tonight we're about to swan dive into the soggy underbelly of Victorian society. A world full of top hats, sideburns, and so many rules that you'll need a lawyer just to have breakfast. But we're not here for afternoon tea with the Queen. No, tonight's journey will take us on a tour of the most bizarre, uncomfortable, and frankly criminal Victorian customs, straight from the age that brought you both Sherlock Holmes and the first flushable public toilet. Before you relax into your crumb-free bed, go ahead and like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from, and whether your neighbours are as weird as Victorian Londoners were. Now, dim the lights, crank your fan to gentle Victorian ghost breeze, and snuggle in. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered why people in the 1800s took family portraits with their dead relatives? Or what it feels like to wear 10 pounds of underwear just to go for a walk? Did Victorian doctors really think your uterus would go on strike if you rode a bicycle? Were children actually expected to be seen and not heard? Or is that just what your Aunt Judith says at Thanksgiving? And perhaps most importantly, could you survive a dinner party where holding your fork the wrong way could get you disowned? Congratulations. You've just woken up in London, 1874. Your nose is full of coal smoke, your hair is full of pomade, and you're already late for your scheduled bout of existential dread. Good luck. You wake to the sound of coughing, a familiar, hacking noise echoing down the street. Children, barely old enough to spell soot, are being stuffed up chimneys to clean them out. No safety gear, no shoes, just a brush and the vague hope they'll come out the top, not the fireplace. Let's set the scene. It's barely dawn, and the city is still wrapped in the kind of fog you'd expect if someone left a stew of coal and questionable life decisions simmering overnight. The master sweep, your boss, if you can call a man with 3 teeth and the moral flexibility of a rat a boss, has banged on your door with a stick. He's here for the children. Not in the fairy tale way either, more in the please clean out my flu before I finish my breakfast way. If you're under the age of 10, congratulations, you're now part of the world's most depressing fitness regimen. The reason is simple. Chimneys are narrow. Adults can't fit. So, obviously, the only logical solution, at least by Victorian logic, is to send in the smallest bodies available. Enter you. 4 feet tall, 70% knees and elbows, and about to spend the next few hours wedged inside a vertical shaft of cold bricks, old bird nests, and several centuries worth of regret. If you're lucky, the master sweep will throw a crust of bread your way before the climb. If you're not, well, you can always lick the condensation off the soot. There's no uniform for this job. The closest thing to protective equipment is a thin cotton shirt, which will soon become indistinguishable from your skin thanks to the layers of soot you'll pick up along the way. Shoes? Absolutely not. Bare feet grip better, and besides, if you had shoes, you'd probably just pawn them for a week's worth of beet soup. Up you go, clutching a stiff brush and a burlap sack. Don't look down, don't look up. Just focus on not sneezing, because a good sneeze in a Victorian chimney is basically the universe's way of shaking out the human lint trap. The climb is slow and uncomfortable, sort of like doing yoga in a coffin, if the coffin was vertical and full of crunchy mystery objects. Your knees scrape against crumbling mortar. Your hands find things that no living creature should have to touch before breakfast. Every few minutes you stop, trying to hack up a lung, while the soot clings to your teeth, your eyelashes, and your very soul. The lucky sweeps make it out the top, gasping for air on a rooftop that's already swaying under their weight. The unlucky ones get stuck, wedged like a poorly placed potato, in which case, the master might light a fire below you to encourage progress. Because nothing says motivation like impending combustion. Down below, homeowners are sipping tea and wondering if the faint screams from the fireplace are part of the natural heating process. No one calls the authorities. This is just how things are done. Child labour is the backbone of Victorian progress, right alongside cholera and regrettable facial hair. Occasionally, the city holds a parade to remind everyone how proud they are of their clean chimneys. The parade does not feature the children. By the end of your shift, you look less like a child and more like a Victorian shadow puppet. You're paid a few pennies, or maybe not, depending on how grumpy the master is. There's no time for self-pity. The next house is already expecting you. You'll carry the soot home with you, into your straw bed, into your lungs, and into adulthood, if you're lucky enough to get there. The Victorian era may be known for its industry, but it turns out the only thing less regulated than factory conditions was the vertical nightmare of the chimney sweep. So the next time your smoke detector goes off, spare a thought for the kids who risked becoming fireplace decor just to keep London's fires burning and its secrets well and truly swept under the rug. Your family portrait session takes a morbid turn as Uncle Arthur props up Great Aunt Edna, who has regrettably been dead for 3 days. Don't blink. Victorians might have invented say cheese, but sometimes the cheese is very much expired. Let's set the scene. It's a perfectly normal Thursday afternoon in 1874. The parlour is draped in black crepe, the clock is ticking solemnly, and the family is assembled in their Sunday best, minus the faintest whiff of joy. You're stiff in your starched collar, trying not to scratch at the wool, when the photographer arrives with a tripod the size of a horse and a camera that looks like it could summon spirits as well as capture them. He offers a gentle good afternoon. But really, you both know it's about to get weird. Because this is Victorian England, and death isn't just a part of life, it's a full-scale industry. Mourning, you see, is a competitive sport, and post-mortem photography is the gold medal event. People hire professionals to immortalize not just the living, but the very, very recently deceased. It's one last family photo before burial, Grandma's final close-up, complete with a painted-on blush and the occasional bit of wire for structural support. No, she's not sleeping. And yes, you're expected to look natural while clutching her lifeless hand for the camera. The ritual begins with posing. If you think family photos today are awkward, try maintaining composure while someone props up your dead relative with hidden rods and occasionally instructs you to hold still so she doesn't fall. Sometimes they'll paint open eyes over the closed lids for that extra lifelike effect, sort of like Photoshop, but with a paintbrush and absolutely no sense of boundaries. And then there's the photographer's countdown. Everyone ready? 1, 2, don't move, especially you, Edna. The logic behind all this is surprisingly sentimental. Photographs are expensive. One picture might be all you get for a lifetime, and Victorians are nothing if not practical. So why waste precious silver and chemicals on the living alone? Why not capture your loved one's likeness for posterity, right after they've exited the narrative? In an era before widespread photography, a post-mortem portrait might be the only image the family ever has of dear departed Aunt Edna, who, to be fair, always did have a talent for holding a pose. It's a sensory experience you won't soon forget. The parlour is thick with the scent of lilies, the official flower of we're all trying very hard not to notice anything suspicious. The air is heavy, and so is the mood. Children fidget. Cousin Maud tries not to faint. You're told to smile, but not too much. Joy is unseemly, but visible discomfort is historically accurate. And then, of course, there's the wait. Long exposure times mean you must remain perfectly still for several minutes, which is easier for some participants than others. As the photographer fiddles with his chemicals, you realize that in Victorian England, nothing is too strange for tradition. There are dedicated albums for these memento mori photos, sepia-toned collections of families gathered around the guest of honor, who is usually the only one guaranteed not to blink. Some portraits are respectful, posed in beds as if merely resting. Others are ambitious. Children propped on rocking horses. Husbands seated at desks. The dead arranged with their living relatives in bizarre tableaux that will haunt family reunions for generations. Once the photo is taken, everyone exhales. The photographer promises to retouch the glass plate, perhaps painting a livelier expression on Grandma's face. The portrait is framed, displayed on the mantel, and shown to visitors with the phrase, "She always looked so peaceful." No one mentions the wires, the painted eyes, or the fact that half the room is holding its breath. And that's the legacy. Victorian England, where a family photo might require both a stiff upper lip and an even stiffer relative. Next time you complain about awkward holiday photos, remember, you could be holding hands with someone who's literally dying to be there. You pass a discreet advert in the newspaper offering to relieve young ladies of their burdens. It's not a spa day, it's a baby farm, and no, it's not as wholesome as it sounds. Welcome to the shadowy underbelly of Victorian childcare, where the solution to an inconvenient baby is to hand it off to someone with a business card and a suspiciously large collection of shawls. In an era before social services, safety nets, or even the faintest glimmer of therapy, Victorian society invented a uniquely disturbing system for dealing with the fallout of, let's say, unscheduled parenthood. If you're a single mother in 870, congratulations, society would like to offer you a choice: shame, poverty, or a meeting with Mrs. Wigglesworth, proprietor of London's finest baby farm. The baby farm is not, as the name might suggest, a picturesque countryside retreat for infants to gamble among the cabbages. No. It's typically a rented row house stuffed to the rafters with cribs, crying, and the overwhelming scent of boiled laundry and desperation. Baby farmers, entrepreneurs in the most Victorian sense, accept unwanted infants for a modest fee, often paid by mothers desperate to avoid scandal. The theory is simple. You pay, they care for the child. The reality is anything but. Let's talk business model. Baby farmers advertise in the backs of newspapers, next to cures for baldness and remedies for female ailments. Some promise to place children with loving families, others vow to keep your secret safe forever, which in Victorian terms can be suspiciously brief. Mothers, often shamed into secrecy, deliver their babies wrapped in blankets and worry. The exchange is quick, silent, and heartbreakingly final. No paperwork, no follow-up visits, no one to check whether the farm even has food or, say, a roof. What happens next? Well, that's where things get bleak. At best, the baby is passed along to a family looking for cheap help or future servants. At worst, the farm is more like a waiting room for the afterlife. Infant mortality rates are already sky-high in Victorian cities. Pollution, poverty, and a general aversion to soap take care of that. But baby farming takes it up a notch, with overcrowded, unsanitary conditions and feeding strategies best described as experimental. Imagine trying to keep a dozen infants alive on a budget that wouldn't cover a modern coffee habit. It gets darker. Some baby farmers, eager to maximize profit, realize that feeding, clothing, and caring for a child is expensive and time-consuming. Far easier to let nature take its course. Neglect becomes the norm: watered, down milk, cold rooms, and the kind of lullabies that sound suspiciously like "stop crying or else." In the worst cases, a baby farmer might even resort to more sinister shortcuts, hastening the end for a child whose only crime was being born at the wrong time to the wrong parents. This isn't just urban legend. Victorian newspapers are full of court cases exposing notorious baby farmers, whose homes are discovered to contain records of dozens, even hundreds, of infants who vanished soon after arrival. The public, already addicted to scandal, devours every sordid detail, tutting about the fall of morality while carefully sidestepping the root causes. Laws eventually catch up, but only after enough headlines and enough tragedy. Meanwhile, the baby farming business booms, quietly solving society's problems one infant at a time. For desperate mothers, it offers a grim kind of hope, an escape from ruin, at the cost of a terrible secret. For the rest of society, it's easier to blame a few villains than confront the uncomfortable truth that the real crime is the lack of compassion. So the next time you hear the phrase "it takes a village," remember that in Victorian London, sometimes the village outsourced its most vulnerable to the lowest bidder. all in the name of convenience and respectability. Sleep tight. There's a crowd in the square, and you think there must be a parade. Surprise! It's a public execution, complete with snacks, vendors, and a questionable moral lesson for the children. Step right up, folks. It's the Victorian era's favourite family outing, the public hanging. There's nothing like starting your weekend with a little fresh air, communal horror, and a sausage roll. You can almost smell the anticipation and the boiled onions as the crowd packs into the square, jostling for the best view like they're waiting for the Beatles, except instead of music, it's the sound of a trapdoor creaking. Children perch on their parents' shoulders, couples huddle together, and the local pickpocket takes this opportunity to diversify his portfolio. The atmosphere is festive in that distinct we haven't invented television yet kind of way. Hawkers weave through the crowd, selling everything from penny dreadfuls, true crime comics for the Victorian set, to roast chestnuts, gingerbread men, and commemorative nooses. Yes, really. Why settle for a snow globe when you can go home with a piece of string that's just like the real thing? It's the 19th century equivalent of buying concert merch, except you can't return it if you're traumatized. Let's talk logistics. The condemned man, sometimes woman, occasionally unlucky sheep thief, is paraded through the crowd in a cart, usually looking as grim as you'd expect from someone whose calendar is now alarmingly empty. There's a priest muttering prayers, an official in a fancy hat, and a hangman who's probably both respected and widely avoided at local pubs. You, the spectator, are expected to boo, cheer, and take notes on how not to end up in the gallows queue. Victorian England loves its spectacle, and executions are both entertainment and warning. They're timed for maximum attendance, Saturday mornings, just after payday, so the working folk can turn out in their best coats and worst attitudes. Some families treat it like a picnic, complete with sandwiches and lemonade. Nothing says bonding time like discussing the finer points of due process with your 8-year-old while a condemned man makes his final speech. The logic is straightforward. Let the public see justice served. Maybe it'll scare them straight, or maybe it'll just inspire someone to invent Netflix. You'd think such scenes would be somber, but the crowd is rowdy, sometimes raucous. There's gossip about the criminal's last meal, it's always cold mutton, speculation about whether the hangman will get it right, he doesn't always, and wagers placed on how long it'll take for the crowd to lose interest and move on to the pub. You might even spot a few artists sketching the scene for the morning papers. There's nothing like immortalizing a tragedy for posterity and a tidy profit. As the hangman adjusts the rope, there's a hush, the only truly respectful moment of the morning. Everyone leans forward, and somewhere in the crowd, a vendor quietly raises his prices. The condemned says a few words. The crowd shouts some advice. Repent, or more helpfully, jump, and then the lever is pulled. Applause, gasps, a little fainting, and then the world goes on. The local baker starts a sale. The pickpocket calls it a day, and the square is washed down for next week's matinee. For the condemned, it's the end. For everyone else, it's Saturday. There's a moral, probably, somewhere under all that noise and gingerbread. But if you ask the children what they learned, it's likely that next week's show will be even better, especially if there's a double feature. So next time you complain about weekend traffic or not getting good seats at a concert, remember, you could be fighting for elbow room in a crowd of thousands, craning your neck for a glimpse of the main event, and buying a souvenir noose on your way out. The Victorians really knew how to kill time, sometimes literally. You're hungry. Again, the workhouse menu consists of gruel, hard bread, and existential despair, served 3 times a day, Michelin star not included. Welcome to the Victorian workhouse, the closest thing you'll find to a wellness retreat if wellness is defined as surviving on the barest legal definition of food and zero joy. Forget avocado toast, oat milk lattes, or anything remotely resembling flavour. Here, meals are designed not to nourish, but to punish. Think of it as intermittent fasting, only without the Instagrammable brunch at the end. You line up with the other inmates, clutching your tin bowl, knowing that whatever lands in it will be as bland as the decor and twice as hard to swallow. Let's talk about the star of the menu, gruel. Gruel is to food what elevator music is to entertainment. A thin, watery porridge made from oats, barley, or whatever grain can be boiled into submission without actually costing money. If you're lucky, there's a hint of salt. If you're really lucky, you can almost pretend it's soup. Mostly, it's a grey, lumpy puddle that somehow manages to be both slimy and crunchy, an impressive feat for something with only 2 ingredients. Gruel is served hot, but that's just because the alternative is congealed disappointment. The supporting act is hard bread, which has 2 functions: staving off hunger and providing a blunt instrument in case of escape attempts. Hard bread is exactly what it sounds like, a brick-shaped lump that makes modern biscotti look like cake. It's tough, flavourless, and guaranteed to scrape a layer off your gums with every bite. There's a rumour that if you soak it in your gruel long enough, it becomes edible. There's also a rumour that fairies live at the bottom of the Thames. Both are equally believable. Once you've tackled the bread, it's time to savour your daily ration of water. Tap, of course, and unfiltered. The Victorians had a complicated relationship with water. On one hand, it was cheaper than beer, but on the other, it was frequently full of surprises, most of them bacterial. Still, nothing washes down existential dread quite like a cup of questionable London tap. 3 times a day, this is your routine. The food never changes, the portions never grow, and the taste never improves. If you're lucky, you might get a slice of cheese once a week, or a morsel of boiled beef on a national holiday. Birthdays? Don't be ridiculous. The workhouse isn't about celebrating the passage of time, it's about surviving it. Children, adults, the elderly, all line up for their daily serving of hope reduction. If you're a child, you get less food than an adult because, as everyone knows, growing bones thrive on negative calories. Dining in the workhouse isn't just about eating, it's about discipline. You eat in silence, seated at long communal tables under the watchful eye of the beadle, whose job is to ensure no one tries to smuggle a second ladle of gruel or trade bread for, say, the sweet release of unconsciousness. Conversation is forbidden, laughter is discouraged, and chewing is considered a form of resistance. Any deviation from the rules and you're docked a meal, a punishment that's about as motivational as taking away someone's oxygen. If you're sick, congratulations. You'll get invalid gruel, which is exactly the same as regular gruel, only with a slightly more depressing name. If you're pregnant or nursing, there's a good chance you'll be given extra rations, an additional crumb of bread or a splash of milk so thin it might actually be water in disguise. The Victorian workhouse prided itself on equality, and by equality they meant everyone is equally hungry. After dinner, you shuffle back to your dormitory, stomach growling, and lie awake contemplating the meaning of existence, the price of poverty, and whether it's possible to survive on pure determination and the occasional mouse that wanders too close to the kitchen. Spoiler, it isn't. So next time you open your fridge and sigh because you're out of almond milk or your kale smoothie tastes a bit too healthy, remember, at least your breakfast isn't weaponized bread and disappointment porridge. The Victorian workhouse diet, guaranteed to build character, if not muscle. A police officer eyes you suspiciously as you sit on a bench. Congratulations, you're guilty of wandering while poor, a crime that comes with hard labor and absolutely no sympathy. Let's take a leisurely stroll. Actually, no, scratch that. In Victorian England, strolling is a privilege, and if you look even slightly underfunded, you're liable to be swept away for the crime of existing in public without a visible means of support. You're not loitering, you're just breathing too close to a lamppost, and already you can feel the beady eyes of authority measuring your worth by the state of your boots. If you're sitting on a park bench, you're not resting. You're waiting to be arrested for the heinous offence of sitting without sufficient wealth. This is the world of Victorian vagrancy laws, where poverty isn't just unlucky, it's criminal. The 19th century elite, in their infinite compassion, have decided that idleness is the root of all evil, and that the sight of a ragged coat might cause a merchant's monocle to fall into his soup. So, Parliament passes the Vagrancy Act. A set of rules so broad you can be arrested for standing still, moving too slowly, or even having no visible means of subsistence. If you're poor, your best bet is to move briskly, look busy, and never, ever look like you need a nap. Wandering the streets in search of work? Suspicious. Carrying your possessions in a bundle? Even more suspicious. Simply being outside after dark without a top hat? Practically an admission of guilt. The city is full of constables who patrol with the enthusiasm of truffle pigs, eager to root out anyone who might lower the property values with their existence. A torn coat, a hungry look, or, heaven forbid, a hole in your shoe is enough to get you invited to the local station for questioning, followed by a brisk appointment with the nearest magistrate. The punishments are a masterclass in Victorian overreaction. First offence, a night in the cells, possibly with bread and water if they're feeling generous. Second offence, hard labour. Third offence, congratulations, you may be on a first-name basis with the workhouse beadle. For repeat offenders, there's the treadmill, a giant, pointless hamster wheel for humans. You spend your day walking nowhere, earning blisters and existential crises in equal measure. They say it builds character, but mostly it just builds calluses. If you're thinking, well, surely there's help for the truly needy, you'd be correct if by help you mean a system designed to humiliate, punish, and occasionally starve you back to respectability. Charitable institutions, almshouses, and soup kitchens exist, but they're usually reserved for the deserving poor, that rare breed who are both starving and appropriately humble. Heaven help you if you look surly while waiting for your gruel. Attitude is a sure sign you're a secret criminal. This constant threat changes how you exist in public. You learn to move with purpose, to avoid eye contact, to never linger near a shop window lest someone accuse you of casing the joint. You might try blending in by carrying a book or whistling a jaunty tune, but beware. Too cheerful, and you're clearly drunk. Too sad, and you're up to no good. The ideal is to appear as blandly invisible as possible, a ghost in a sea of top hats and petticoats. Even children aren't immune. The sight of a barefoot child playing in the gutter is enough to set off a wave of civic panic. The police swoop in, the newspapers clutch their pearls, and the courts hand down sentences with the grim efficiency of a sausage machine. Some children are shipped off to reformatories for their own good, others to Australia. Yes, really, Victorian England is happy to export its problems halfway around the world, provided you're poor enough. At the end of the day, the real crime isn't poverty. It's making wealth feel uncomfortable. The city keeps its streets clean by sweeping away the people who remind everyone else that success is sometimes a matter of luck, and that misfortune can be criminalized with nothing more than a frown and a fountain pen. So next time you see someone taking a quiet moment on a park bench, spare a thought for the days when resting your feet could land you in the stocks, and remember that sometimes the biggest crime is just being seen. You visit your local apothecary for a headache, but instead you're sold a spiked metal mitt, a remedy for self-abuse. Spoiler, the cure is worse than the alleged disease. Welcome to Victorian England, where medical innovation means turning basic human confusion into a full-blown retail opportunity. In this era, there is no such thing as too personal when it comes to health, and no bodily urge is too private for the attention of science, or a man in a waistcoat with an alarming collection of metal contraptions. You're here for aspirin, but you'll be leaving with the sort of item that makes you question whether progress is always a good thing. Victorian society is terrified, utterly terrified, of what they called self-abuse. A phrase so ominous it sounds like it should come with a thunderclap. The doctors, the clergy, and your Aunt Gertrude are all convinced that solo mischief will rot your brain, stunt your growth, and probably make you fail at Latin. The cure, the anti-masturbation device emporium, a thriving cottage industry of shame, discomfort, and industrial-grade metalworking. Let's take a look at what's on the shelves. The spiked mitt is a bestseller, but it's not alone. There are belts, cages, straps, and spring-loaded harnesses, all engineered for maximum deterrence and minimum comfort. Some are made of leather, some of steel, all of them designed to make sure that if you get any bright ideas at bedtime, you'll regret it. The most advanced models even come with little bells that alert your parents, because nothing says sweet dreams like waking up to your mother's disappointed face and the sound of distant church bells. And if you're thinking, surely, this is all for boys, allow the Emporium to assure you that girls get their own special treatment, padded gloves for sleeping, chemical deterrents, and lectures on the dangers of wandering thoughts. Because if there's anything the Victorians fear more than germs, it's teenagers left alone with their imaginations. Of course, this isn't just about personal health. The medical establishment is fully on board. Doctors warn that self-pollution will cause everything from blindness to bad posture to, my personal favourite, general malaise, which is just Victorian for we don't know what's wrong, but it's probably your fault. Prescription? Strap on this medieval-looking contraption and sleep in fear. The cure might not fix your headache, but it will certainly give you something new to worry about. Parents buy these devices with the same enthusiasm modern parents buy fidget spinners, except fidget spinners don't come with iron spikes. Victorian catalogues are full of ads for anti-masturbation belts and gloves, often described in florid prose, guaranteed to correct youthful indiscretion, endorsed by leading physicians. Now with more spikes, it's the only time you'll see doctor-recommended next-to device that looks like a bear trap. For those who can't afford the hardware, there are natural remedies, cold baths, long walks, and a diet of boiled vegetables. Anything to distract, suppress, or confuse the offending urge. If all else fails, the family physician might recommend an institution for nervous disorders. In Victorian England, there is no problem so small it can't be solved by a padded cell or a stern lecture from someone with a handlebar moustache. Meanwhile, the real side effect is humiliation. The social shame is so thick you could spread it on toast. Everyone pretends this is normal, that these devices are as essential as a handkerchief or a good umbrella. You try not to talk about it, except in the vaguest, most euphemistic terms. And so the Emporium thrives, selling misery one spike at a time. So the next time you're embarrassed by a modern health fad or an awkward visit to the pharmacy, remember, at least no one is strapping you into a spiked glove and congratulating you on your newfound virtue. In the grand tradition of medical innovation, sometimes the cure really is worse than the disease. Breathing is optional as your maid tightens the corset laces. Fashionable? Maybe. Felony-level lung compression? Definitely. Let's set the mood. It's a brisk Victorian morning. Birds are chirping, carriages are rumbling over the cobblestones, and somewhere in your wardrobe, a complex knot of linen and whalebone is plotting against your ribcage. You stand in your dressing room, arms outstretched, as your maid, part butler, part medieval chiropractor, plants a foot against your back and hauls on the laces like she's trying to dock the Queen Mary. Forget yoga or Pilates. You've signed up for the original waist training regimen, and your internal organs are not on board. This is the world of the Victorian corset, a fashion statement and medical mystery all in one. It's not just a garment, it's a lifestyle. The ideal figure is a wasp waist, achieved through years of strategic squeezing. Whale baleen, that's right, actual whale parts, is sewn into the fabric to ensure rigidity. And the entire apparatus is engineered to defy both logic and the human respiratory system. In modern terms, imagine someone designing shapewear while in a competition to see who can cause the most fainting spells before breakfast. The ritual begins early. If you're a woman of status, corsetry starts in childhood. Little girls are eased into training corsets before they can even spell spine, the Victorian equivalent of pre-algebra. By adulthood, the corset is as essential as your morning tea. except it doesn't wake you up so much as keep you one shallow breath away from passing out. Fashion magazines encourage you to cinch tighter each year. A 17-inch waist is the height of refinement, they declare, glossing over the minor inconvenience of not being able to eat a whole biscuit in one sitting. The effect on your daily life is immediate and profound. Sitting down? Prepare to lower yourself like a malfunctioning marionette. Dropped something? Hope you didn't like that hairpin anyway. Want to laugh, sneeze, or take a deep breath? Better schedule that on a day when the laces are loose, or at least have smelling salts and a fainting couch on standby. Even walking requires adaptation. The Victorian waddle wasn't just a matter of etiquette, it was the body's way of quietly protesting against internal rearrangement. Doctors have opinions, and for once, they're not entirely wrong. While some medical professionals swear that corsets support good posture, most quietly admit that crushing your lower ribs, displacing your organs, and restricting blood flow is probably not the ticket to good health. Popular complaints include shallow breathing, heart palpitations, indigestion, and the ever-present risk of a spontaneous Victorian collapse. Still, for every doctor warning about tight lacing, there's a fashion columnist ready to call you a social pariah for turning up at the opera with a waist wider than a candlestick. The reality is, for many, wearing a corset isn't even a choice. Social pressure is relentless. It's not just about beauty. It's about respectability, class, and, ironically, self-control. You're judged by the straightness of your spine and the narrowness of your waist. If your laces aren't tight enough, Aunt Mildred will know, and she will absolutely mention it over tea. The men of the era, meanwhile, are free to breathe, eat and slouch to their heart's content, occasionally complaining about how women are so delicate as they sprint away from a passing wasp. And at the end of the day, when the last guest has left and the door is locked, there's the great moment of relief, unlacing. For a few blissful minutes, you expand like a resurrected soufflé. Air returns to your lungs, and your internal organs gingerly resume their original places. You might even manage a giggle, if you haven't fainted first. So, next time you wriggle into some snug shapewear or sigh about skinny jeans, remember, it could be worse. You could be living in an age where fashion is enforced by whalebone, etiquette, and the constant threat of public fainting. Now, take a deep breath, just because you can. Your friends suggest a trip to the local lunatic asylum, not to visit anyone, but for entertainment. It's the Victorian version of reality TV, only with more restraints and less dignity. Welcome to the lighter side of Victorian leisure, where, having exhausted all the thrills of croquet, cucumber sandwiches, and politely repressing your emotions, you decide to spice up your Sunday afternoon by touring the local mental institution. Nothing says quality time like wandering the echoing halls of Bedlam, peering at patients through iron bars, and pretending it's all in the name of science. You're not there to help, of course. You're there for the spectacle, part freak show, part cautionary tale, and entirely Victorian in its ability to combine moral superiority with a touch of barely disguised horror. You pay your admission, a real shilling, mind you, since the asylum needs to keep the lights on somehow, and join a line of middle-class families, church groups, and bored aristocrats. The atmosphere is part museum, part circus. Children tug at their mothers' skirts, eager for the next display. Father jokes about losing his mind if the tea runs out, and even your Aunt Prudence seems excited, clutching her parasol and a copy of Etiquette for Lunatics, a guide for the modern lady. Inside, a board attendant leads your group from ward to ward, rattling off diagnoses as if he's listing the exhibits at the zoo. Here we have our melancholics. Over there, the hysterics, very fashionable this season. And in this corner, the incurables, who will never again be trusted with cutlery or politics. You nod politely, as if you understand the difference between mania and moral insanity, which in Victorian England is mostly a matter of how much trouble you cause at dinner parties. For the patients, of course, it's less amusing. Every week, they are paraded before strangers like living curiosities. Some shrink from the gawking, others perform for coins or scraps of cake. You're encouraged to observe their behavior. The more dramatic, the better. Your guide might even toss in a story about a particularly infamous resident who once thought he was Napoleon, a teapot, or, most shockingly, a woman with opinions. Laughter ripples through the group. For the price of a shilling, you've purchased the right to feel lucky, normal, and just a little bit superior. Sensory details hit hard. The corridors reek of antiseptic and despair, a scent only slightly masked by lavender sachets pinned to your lapel. Iron beds line the wards, and the sound of distant sobbing echoes down stone hallways. The treatment rooms are full of mysterious equipment, restraint chairs, ice-cold baths, and something called a tranquility helmet, which looks like it should come with a user manual and a warning from OSHA. The staff explain these are for the patient's own good, though you can't help noticing that most of them look more traumatized than tranquilized. The justification for asylum tourism is, of course, education. The Victorians believe that witnessing madness up close will inspire compassion, or, failing that, encourage you to avoid scandalous behaviors like reading novels or feeling anxious in public. One visit to Bedlam, warns your grandmother, and you'll never complain about your nerves again. It's all about perspective, even if that perspective is deeply unsettling. But beneath the surface, there's something even darker. Many of these patients are here for reasons that, by modern standards, wouldn't get you banned from a book club, let alone locked away for life. Melancholy after the loss of a child, refusing to eat meat, or simply being inconvenient to a husband or father with the right paperwork. Women in particular are admitted for hysteria, a catch-all diagnosis for everything from PMS to having an opinion about dinner. The tour ends at the gift shop, where you can buy postcards, pamphlets, or the oddly popular souvenir straitjacket for your little brother. Your group files out, chattering about the unforgettable experience, already planning next Sunday's outing, maybe the morgue if the weather holds. So next time you're tempted to binge-watch a guilty pleasure reality show, remember, at least no one's charging admission to gawk at your worst day. In Victorian England, madness was entertainment, and empathy was just another thing they hadn't quite invented yet. Your toddler won't sleep? No problem. Victorian pharmacies offer soothing syrups and quietness powders, now with extra morphine. It's late at night in the nursery, and instead of a white noise machine and gentle lullabies, you've got a glass bottle filled with something called Godfrey's cordial. The pharmacist recommends it with the cheerful assurance of someone who has never met your child at 3 a.m. You shake a few drops into the spoon, hoping for a miracle. The label promises sweet dreams, quiet nights, and relief from wind, fretfulness, and teething woes. In reality, you're dosing your infant with enough opiates to tranquilize a grown man. Victorian parenting. Because nothing says goodnight like a light chemical coma. Let's back up a moment. Victorian England is a world that hasn't quite figured out germ theory, but it has absolutely mastered the art of putting babies to sleep, sometimes permanently. Pharmacies offer an array of concoctions: Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, Dalby's carminative, and Atkinson Barker's Royal Infant's preservative. Each comes with an ornate label, a whiff of respectability, and an ingredients list that reads like the opening scene of a true crime podcast. Just a touch of morphia, a dash of opium, and a sprinkle of chloroform. If it didn't make the baby drowsy, it would at least make the parents stop worrying. The logic behind all this is painfully Victorian. Children are noisy, parents are exhausted, and everyone trusts pharmacists more than doctors, mostly because the pharmacist will sell you a bottle of anything, no questions asked. Child rearing is hard work, especially when you're running a household, mending 48 pairs of socks, and keeping your husband convinced that roast beef appears by magic. So, rather than let little Edith scream herself hoarse, you reach for the syrup. She quiets down almost immediately, drifting off to a sleep so deep even the housemaid's clanging doesn't wake her. You marvel at this new miracle, until you realize it's also being used to keep orphanages and workhouses blessedly silent. Let's talk side effects. While the immediate benefit is obvious, peace, quiet, and possibly your first full night's sleep in months, The downsides are the stuff of modern nightmares. Babies regularly become addicted, lethargic, or in some cases, simply never wake up at all. Victorian society brushes these incidents under the rug. It's all natural causes and childhood weakness. The true cause, that your teething powder contained enough laudanum to flatten a medium-sized sheep, goes unmentioned. It's not just opium, either. Some formulas add alcohol, cannabis, or good old-fashioned ether to the mix. Anything to help relax the child's nerves. Doctors, when consulted, might shrug and prescribe more of the same. After all, if the child is quiet, the treatment must be working. A win for the apothecary, a win for the parents, and, let's be honest, the only win the baby is getting is a head start on 19th century substance dependency. Of course, not every parent uses these syrups. There are those who swear by old-fashioned rocking, lullabies, and the time-honored tradition of ignoring the baby until it gives up out of sheer existential fatigue. But when everyone from your neighbour to the Queen herself recommends a spoonful of mother's quietness, it's hard to say no. In Victorian England, good parenting is judged by how silent your house is, not how many children make it to their 5th birthday. Eventually, the medical profession catches on. Reports begin to surface. Infants failing to thrive, mysterious cot deaths, and children with symptoms that look suspiciously like withdrawal. Slowly, regulations creep in, and soothing syrup becomes harder to find. Though not before an entire generation has slept through the Industrial Revolution in an opium haze. So next time your child is wailing in the middle of the night, and you're eyeing the medicine cabinet with desperation, be grateful that the worst you'll find is some cherry-flavoured Tylenol. Victorian parents had it harder, but at least their houses were quiet. Sometimes too quiet. Sleep tight, and maybe check the ingredients before you dose the baby. You buy tickets to the circus, but instead of acrobats, you're treated to the spectacle of human curiosities, people with disabilities, exhibited for profit and public gawking. Step right up, ladies and gentlemen. For one night only, witness the bearded lady, the world's tallest man, the tattooed wonder, and a host of others who, through sheer genetic misfortune or medical misadventure, have been transformed into entertainment for the entire family. Forget the flying trapeze or the juggler with too much free time. Victorian audiences want something far more exotic. They want to see the other, the strange, and the unusual. And, if you're lucky, you'll get to stare, point, and maybe even buy a souvenir photograph to remember the day you paid a shilling to gawk at someone else's existence. The setting is grand, in that faded velvet, sawdust on the floor, faint whiff of cabbage whey. The ringmaster, top hat gleaming, works the crowd into a lather, promising wonders and oddities the likes of which have never been seen. The children are wide-eyed, clutching sticky toffees. The adults, slightly bored but desperate for distraction, scan the bill for a hint of scandal. This is more than an event. It's a rite of passage, a family outing, and, for Victorians, a guilt-free way to feel better about their own mediocre bone structure. Behind the curtain, the so-called performers are preparing for another round of public inspection. Some, like Tom Thumb or Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man, will be treated with a strange mix of sympathy, fascination, and patronizing applause. Others, less marketable, endure a life of back-to-back shows and backroom indignity, managed by impresarios whose only real talent is squeezing profit from pain. If you're a performer, your choices are brutally simple. Live on display, or not at all. At least here, you get a share of the ticket sales and 3 square meals, assuming the promoter isn't skimming off the top. Let's not pretend the audience is here out of empathy. The language of the posters says it all. Marvel at nature's mistakes, a parade of living curiosities. Sensationalism reigns supreme. The crowd whispers, gasps, and occasionally recoils, equal parts entertained and reassured that, whatever their problems, at least they aren't that. It's the Victorian version of reality TV, minus the privacy waivers and plus a lot more staring. If you're unlucky enough to catch the interactive part of the show, you might be invited to ask a question, poke a finger, or challenge the authenticity of someone's beard or conjoined twin status. Victorian medicine is barely out of the leech phase, so rumours and pseudoscience run wild. Is it a trick? Witchcraft? Too much cheese? Everyone has an opinion, and none of them involve basic human dignity. And yet, for all its horror, the freak show is complicated. For some performers, it's the only place they can earn a living, travel, or escape the grinding poverty of the workhouse. Some even achieve celebrity status, dining with royalty and signing autographs. But this success is as precarious as the tightrope. One slip, one change in public taste, and you're back in the shadows. Back outside, the audience shuffles home, pockets full of penny pamphlets and stomachs full of self-satisfaction. The children will reenact what they've seen. The adults will tell themselves it was all educational, a lesson in science, or tolerance, or some other rationalization that helps them sleep at night. The tent is packed away, the performers retreat to their cramped wagons, and the ringmaster counts his takings. So, next time you're tempted to gawk at someone on social media or rubberneck at life's misfits, remember, the Victorian freak show was more than just a circus act. It was a mirror, sometimes ugly, sometimes true, of a society still learning what empathy actually means. Step right up and take a good look at your own reflection. You're expected to swallow a dainty pill at breakfast, not a vitamin, but arsenic, to keep your complexion fashionably pale and your lifespan dramatically shorter. Welcome to the Victorian breakfast table, where your morning routine includes not just toast and a cup of weak tea, but a sprinkle of pure, unadulterated poison. No, this isn't a murder mystery. It's the latest health craze. You reach for your little bottle, delicately labelled complexion wafers, and pop one on your tongue, washing it down with a sigh and a slurp of tepid tea. Why? Because nothing says upper class like skin as pale as a sheet and a set of internal organs quietly staging a protest. This is the age when beauty comes with an ingredient list straight from a detective novel. Want to look like you haven't seen the sun since childhood? Arsenic is your new best friend. Forget bronzer or self-tanner. The only acceptable look is a face that screams, "I haven't gone outside since the Crimean War." Pale skin means wealth, leisure, and a life blissfully untouched by farm work or manual labour. If you're ruddy-cheeked, people assume you've been digging ditches, and you'll never get invited to the right dinner parties. The logic is, of course, entirely Victorian. If a little bit of something is good, more must be better. Arsenic starts as a powder mixed into face creams and lotions, guaranteed to refine the complexion, if not your prospects for survival. Eventually, the industry evolves, and the truly fashion-forward take their poison internally, popping pills between sips of tea and dry toast. The result? A glowing, ghostly pallor, the kind that makes you look half ethereal, half embalmed. It's the world's only health regimen where getting sicker is actually the goal. Let's talk side effects. The beauty columns in women's magazines may promise you a fresh and youthful appearance, but the fine print is ominous. Nausea, stomach cramps, vomiting, hair loss, and, on special occasions, death. If you're lucky, you'll just suffer the slow, dramatic decline so beloved by Victorian novelists. Languid afternoons on the fainting couch, mysterious fevers, and a collection of delicate handkerchiefs stained with symptoms. If you're unlucky, breakfast will be the last meal you ever beautify. Still, the pressure is on. Your mother-in-law will scrutinize you for the faintest sign of sun, and friends will exchange recipes for the best combination of arsenic and vinegar, as if discussing a particularly tricky pudding. Even men are drawn in. Victorian gentlemen dabble in arsenic too, seeking that elusive look of noble fragility which is really just anemia by another name. The pharmacy is happy to help. There are entire shelves of complexion wafers, medicated lozenges, and beauty tonics, all with the subtle warning to use only as directed. Translation, good luck. Of course, some doctors eventually catch on, warning against the complexion craze. But in a world where doctors still debate the merits of leeches, public health advice is easy to ignore, especially if it comes from someone with a suspiciously healthy tan. Besides, the magazines and advertising posters are relentless, showing glowing testimonials and illustrations of fashionably pale women living their best, if shortest, lives. After breakfast, you peer into the mirror. Is your skin pale enough? Are you beautiful enough? Is it time for another wafer? Maybe just one more for good measure. Never mind the churning stomach. You have a reputation to maintain. And social death is worse than any actual poisoning. You powder your face, adjust your corset, and float into the parlor, a vision of beauty, privilege, and reckless disregard for warning labels. So next time you grumble about skincare trends or eye a suspicious miracle supplement online, remember, at least your daily routine doesn't require a side of poison with your porridge. Victorian beauty was about suffering in silence, sometimes permanently. Beauty is pain, but in this era, it's also a little bit fatal. The local pub is packed. Tonight's event? Terriers versus a cage full of rats. Place your bets. No animals or souls are spared. Step inside your friendly neighbourhood Victorian tavern and you might expect the usual frothy ale, a brawl over the last pickled egg, and a man in the corner muttering about ghosts. But tonight, the real attraction is down in the cellar, where men in stovepipe hats gather shoulder to shoulder, waving coins and shouting odds. There's a wooden pen in the centre, and inside, a writhing mass of rats, dozens, maybe hundreds. All eyes are on the next contender, a wiry terrier, tail wagging, completely unaware that his moment of glory is about to begin. This, dear listener, is rat baiting, the Victorian pastime that makes arm wrestling seem positively refined. Forget darts or dominoes. The main event is watching how many rodents a dog can dispatch before the bartender calls last orders. The crowd's excitement is palpable, a feverish blend of adrenaline, gambling, and the kind of moral flexibility that lets you cheer for a blood sport while sipping your pint. The rules are simple and brutal. A barrel is upended, and rats pour into the pit. A desperate, squeaking avalanche. The terrier is released, jaws snapping, fur flying, as the crowd shouts encouragement and counts kills. Bets are placed on the dog, the rats, the length of the carnage, and anything else a creative gambler can imagine. It's the 1800s answer to pay-per-view, only with more fleas and less paperwork. For the dogs, it's a test of breeding and nerve. Owners parade their terriers around the bar like proud parents at a science fair. Mine cleared 50 rats in 5 minutes last week, boasts one, while another polishes a tiny silver trophy won by Bess, Queen of the Pit. The rats, meanwhile, have no fans, no trophies, and certainly no luck. They are there to die. Their fate sealed the moment they were scooped up from London's back alleys. The audience is a cross-section of Victorian society. Labourers and clerks, swells in waistcoats, even the odd nobleman slumming it for the thrill. Women are mostly absent, unless they own the pub, in which case they're running the betting ring with ruthless efficiency. Children peer in from the doorway, eager to catch a glimpse of the action before being shooed away. The air is thick with sawdust, sweat, and the pungent scent of rodent panic. Someone passes around a tray of gin. The atmosphere is as festive as it is unsettling. And let's be clear, this isn't just about rats. The Victorians' appetite for animal cruelty is bottomless. If it moves, bites, or squeals, it can be bet on, fought, or thrown in a ring. Cockfighting, bear baiting, dog fights, each draws its own enthusiastic crowd, each wrapped in the same thin justification. It's tradition, or it keeps the rats down, or, most honestly, it's better than a night at home. The line between pest control and public spectacle is not so much blurred as trampled underfoot. Occasionally, the authorities stage a crackdown, raiding the rat pits and fining the organisers. Newspapers publish indignant columns, but the sport simply moves elsewhere, to another pub, another basement, another crowd ready to cheer on the next round of fur and fang. For every moral crusader preaching about kindness to animals, there are a dozen regulars eager for the thrill of the pit. After the night's entertainment, the floor is swept, the winnings collected, and the terriers fed bits of sausage as a reward for their valour. The rats, well, there are always more rats. The crowd disperses, everyone a little richer or poorer, but nobody much wiser. So, the next time your local bar hosts trivia night or open mic, take a moment to be grateful. At least the only thing being slaughtered is someone's self-esteem after a bad karaoke performance. In Victorian England, the pub wasn't just a place to drink, it was a front row seat to the darkest corners of human amusement, where nobody left clean and nothing came out unscathed. Your toothaches? Good news. The blacksmith will pull it, for a shilling and maybe a swig of gin. No anesthesia, lots of screaming. Let's paint the scene. It's a misty Victorian morning. Your jaw is throbbing with a pain that radiates from your molars to your very soul, and there's no dentist's office in sight. Instead, you stagger past the barber's pole and the apothecary, where opium syrup is reserved for babies, not grown-ups with dental distress, and head for the clang of the local blacksmith's forge. After all, who better to trust with delicate oral surgery than the man who spends his days shoeing horses and sharpening scythes? This is the golden age of do-it-yourself dentistry. Victorian medicine might be obsessed with leeches and mysterious powders, but teeth are another matter. When the agony of a rotten tooth becomes unbearable, the quickest solution is not a trained professional, but the neighbourhood blacksmith. His toolkit? Pliers, used on both horseshoes and humans, hammers, and a workbench that smells faintly of burnt hoof and despair. There's no need to make an appointment. You simply show up, grimace in pain, and hand over a shilling, maybe two if you want him to wipe the tools first. The blacksmith looks you up and down, wipes his hands on a suspiciously oily rag, and offers a sterilising shot of gin. You'd prefer a local anaesthetic, but the Victorians reserve that sort of thing for surgery on royalty and, occasionally, small yapping dogs. For everyone else, gin will have to do. You knock it back, and try to ignore the fact that the cup smells a lot like horses. Now, you're told to open wide. The blacksmith, not one for bedside manner, squints into your mouth and jams a set of iron tongs onto the offending tooth. He gives it a few experimental yanks, which you feel all the way down to your toenails. The sound is halfway between a crunch and a squeal. The tooth, you assume, not you, though it's hard to tell. There's a crowd, naturally, because dental drama is second only to rat baiting for local entertainment. Kids peer in through the door, someone makes a joke about biting the bullet, and you have a moment to reflect on all the choices that led you here. The process is neither quick nor gentle. Victorian blacksmiths are masters of brute force, but subtlety is not their strong suit. If the tooth breaks, you'll just keep going, digging, twisting, and possibly extracting bits you'd planned on keeping. Blood is expected, as is screaming. Sometimes the patient passes out, which is considered a blessing. No one brings you a lollipop afterward, but you might get another shot of gin if you're lucky. There are risks, of course. Infection is common, after all. The same tools have probably been used to fix a wagon wheel and wrangle a particularly stubborn mule that very morning. Tetanus, sepsis, and lockjaw are all possible outcomes, but no one really keeps track of these things. If you survive with all your teeth, or even most of your jaw, intact, you're considered lucky. If not, well, you've contributed to the blacksmith's ongoing education in human anatomy. Why not see a doctor, you ask? Simple. They're expensive, rare, and honestly, not much better at pulling teeth. Dentists exist, but they're mostly found in cities, and their methods aren't much less horrifying. The best you can hope for is a barber surgeon with slightly cleaner hands and a nice collection of leeches. At least with the blacksmith, you know exactly what you're getting. and you're unlikely to leave with a new haircut or a mysterious tonic that tastes suspiciously like paint thinner. By the end of the ordeal, your tooth is gone, your jaw is numb, possibly forever, and you've learned a valuable lesson about the importance of flossing. Once someone invents it, that is. You stagger home, minus one tooth, but plus one story to horrify your grandchildren. So, next time you complain about your dentist's waiting room music or the bill for your root canal, just remember, it could be you, a blacksmith, and a pair of pliers. And absolutely no anesthesia. You have a bad day and cry in public. Congratulations, you're now officially insane and eligible for a lifetime in an asylum. All expenses paid by the state. Welcome to the Victorian legal system, where mental health crisis is less a call for help and more a fast track to incarceration. The laws are written with the flexibility of overcooked spaghetti and the empathy of a tax auditor. Your neighbours watch with the keen interest of people who are just one spilled cup of tea away from denouncing you themselves. Maybe you wept in the street, maybe you argued with a lamppost, or maybe you just forgot to tip your hat to the vicar on a particularly grey Tuesday. The result is the same, a swift diagnosis of criminal lunacy. It all begins with the faintest whiff of nonconformity. In an age where the correct response to tragedy is to keep a stiff upper lip and never mention your feelings, public displays of emotion are downright scandalous. Crying, shouting, or heaven forbid, laughing in church are all warning signs. Perhaps you lost your job, or a loved one, or maybe just your umbrella for the third time this week. Any outburst in public is an open invitation for well-meaning bystanders to summon a constable and, soon after, a doctor with a quill and an appetite for dramatic diagnoses. The process is brisk. First, you're assessed by a lunacy commissioner or a local magistrate who may or may not have actual medical training. They'll ask probing questions like, have you recently spoken to pigeons? Or, do you sometimes feel sad on Mondays? The answer, as far as the system is concerned, is always yes. You're issued a certificate, not of appreciation, but of lunacy. The law considers you a risk to society and to yourself. Mainly to society, if we're being honest. Next stop, the asylum. You're bundled off to a grand Gothic institution on the edge of town, somewhere between a hospital and a haunted mansion. The sign out front says Sanctuary for the Afflicted, but everyone knows it as Bedlam Light. You're now part of the state's ambitious program to make madness both invisible and very, very institutionalized. The doors lock behind you, the key disappears, and your relatives quietly edit you out of the family Bible. Inside, the line between criminal and patient blurs. Your fellow residents range from actual dangers to society, pickpockets, arsonists, chronic poets, to people whose only crime was having too many feelings. The staff are stern but fair, which is Victorian, for they might hit you with a mop if you don't behave. Treatment is creative. Cold baths for melancholy, restraints for restlessness, and, if you're lucky, a daily walk around the courtyard with the other incurables. You might be put to work in the laundry or the garden, because nothing says rest cure like 14 hours of weeding. You write letters home, but they're censored for signs of continued lunacy. If you ask to leave, it's proof you're still mad. If you quietly accept your fate, it's proof you've settled in. There's no winning. Women are especially vulnerable. Hysteria covers everything from postnatal depression to inconvenient opinions. Men fare little better, often labelled melancholic for daring to grieve or manic for showing enthusiasm about literally anything. The law is clear. Once you're inside, getting out is as tricky as escaping a magician's trunk. Even if your madness clears up, the stigma never does. Employers are wary, friends are scarce, and you're forever the person who lost their mind. For the Victorians, madness is less a condition than a convenient label for anyone who disrupts the status quo. So next time you're having a rough day and considering a public meltdown, remember, in Victorian England, there's a fine line between eccentric and institutionalized, and it's policed by people who haven't smiled, since the reign of George IV. If you need to cry, maybe wait until you're home, preferably in a locked cupboard. It's raining, and you wish you owned boots. Instead, you slosh through knee-high mud and horse droppings, Victorian street cleaning at its finest. Welcome to a stroll through Victorian London, where every step is a gamble and your nostrils are under constant attack. Forget scenic riverside walks or the gentle click-clack of stylish heels on cobblestones. Urban navigation in the 19th century is a heroic journey through muck, manure, and miscellaneous fluids of mysterious origin. Your shoes, if you own any, are nothing more than thin leather flaps that absorb every drop. And as for socks, let's just say they're a luxury reserved for the truly optimistic. Let's start with the basics. Transportation. Horses are everywhere, hauling omnibuses, carriages, and every kind of delivery wagon. For every horse, there's a daily donation to the city streets, sometimes in mid-trot, sometimes thoughtfully deposited right where the pavement dips. London alone is home to over 50,000 horses, each producing about a quart of, let's say, street decor per day. Do the math, and you've got a city more dung than stone. Modern street sweepers haven't been invented yet, and the closest thing to public sanitation is the occasional man with a shovel, a bad attitude, and the desperate hope that he'll avoid being trampled. When it rains, which it does, with the commitment of a British butler, the streets transform into a boot-sucking soup. The city's drainage is mostly theoretical, and the gutters overflow, carrying everything from horse apples to last night's discarded fish heads. You hoist your skirts or trousers, pray for high ground, and attempt to tiptoe through puddles that are deeper than your bank account. Watch your step isn't just good advice. It's the difference between making it home with dignity or becoming an unwilling participant in the world's least glamorous mud wrestling event. But wait, there's more. Add in chamber pots emptied out of windows. Bonus points if you remember to shout "Gardez l'eau" before unleashing the torrent. And you've got a city that smells like a cross between a petting zoo and an abandoned fish market. The scent is described in guidebooks as bracing. In reality, it's enough to curl your hair, clear your sinuses, and inspire a lifelong aversion to anything described as organic. The city tries its best. There are crossing sweepers, often children who, for a penny, will clear a path through the mire with a broom that's seen better centuries. For the fashionable elite, there are sedan chairs, carried above the chaos by a pair of strong-armed porters. But if you're an ordinary citizen, it's shoes off, trousers rolled, and hope for the best. Anyone with somewhere important to be learns to walk quickly, eyes down, and to develop a sixth sense for incoming splashes. Clothing, of course, is no match for the elements. By the end of a day in the city, your hems are crusted, your boots ruined, and your spirits dampened in every sense of the word. The Victorians invent the Macintosh raincoat and the rubber galoche, but these are expensive, clumsy, and generally reserved for those who can afford the laundry bills. Most Londoners resign themselves to a wardrobe permanently scented with eau de stable. Let's not forget the wildlife. Rats thrive in the sewers, crows feast on the leavings, and stray dogs prowl for scraps. Every walk is a masterclass in dodging not just animal surprises but fellow pedestrians, who are just as desperate to avoid a public wipeout. After your heroic journey, you arrive home with muddy feet and a new appreciation for the humble doormat. You scrape, scrub, and pray you don't track anything too incriminating across the floor. And as you collapse in a damp heap, you wonder, was it worth it? Next time, maybe you'll just stay in. So the next time you complain about a bit of slush on the pavement or a rogue piece of gum, remember, in Victorian times, the only thing deeper than the mud was the collective denial about just how filthy city life could be. Walking the streets was a full-contact sport, and only the bravest or the least well-shod made it home with their dignity intact. Someone dies. Instead of moving on, you're expected to wear black for years, buy special mourning stationery, and signal your sadness to strangers via hat ribbons. Welcome to Victorian grief, where sadness isn't just a feeling, it's a full-time job. The death of a loved one sets off a carefully choreographed ritual that makes modern thoughts and prayers look positively minimalist. You don't simply mourn, you invest, you accessorize, and you perform your loss with the enthusiasm of a method actor in a black veil. If grief had a supply chain, the Victorians would have invented it. Step 1. Wardrobe overhaul. Whatever color you used to enjoy is now forbidden. Pack up your reds, your blues, your tartans, and prepare for a wardrobe so uniformly black it would make a goth teenager jealous. And not just any black. There's deep mourning black, matte, never shiny, half mourning, add a touch of grey or lavender when you're feeling festive, and weeds, which, in this context, are not a gardening project but the ribbons, veils, and cuffs you must now attach to every garment you own. If you thought seasonal shopping was bad, try shopping for 4 stages of grief. Fashion isn't enough, there's stationery to buy. Announcing your loss is practically an industry. Mourning cards, edged in thick black, must be sent to every acquaintance, notifying them that you are officially out of circulation and emotionally unavailable. If you skip this step, Aunt Mildred will gossip about your callousness all the way to next Easter. Envelopes, calling cards, even handkerchiefs are customized so that no one within 50 miles can mistake you for someone not in the throes of sorrow. Let's talk duration. Mourning isn't a brief nod to sadness, it's a marathon. Widows can expect to wear black for up to 2 years, with strict rules on when to move from deep to half to no longer terribly sad, but still politely somber. If you remarry too soon, expect raised eyebrows and possible social exile. The rules differ for men and women, of course. A widower can be back in colour within months, but a widow's schedule is practically a lifetime subscription. The industry doesn't stop at clothing and paper goods. Mourning jewellery is all the rage. Jet brooches, lockets with tiny curls of the deceased's hair, and rings engraved with sentimental poetry. For those truly committed to the aesthetic, you might even invest in a brooch made from woven hair, a constant, slightly itchy reminder that Uncle Albert is always with you, literally. If you want to make your grief portable, special mourning bags and umbrellas are available, so your sorrow can be expressed rain or shine. And heaven help you if you get caught smiling in public. Social pressure is relentless. Neighbours will monitor your hat ribbons and critique the depth of your veil. A misplaced chuckle at the market might start a rumour that you never really cared for dear Papa after all. The ritual is enforced not by law, but by the sort of relentless social surveillance only possible in an era without Netflix. Businesses see opportunity. Shops spring up on every corner, selling mourning garb, stationery, and all the accessories required for a stylish sadness. Undertakers compete for your custom with ever more elaborate coffins, plumed horses, and invitations to the grandest funeral processions. Death becomes not just a private loss, but a public event, complete with guest lists and commemorative souvenirs. Children aren't spared either. Tiny black suits and miniature veils for the schoolyard, and a lifetime supply of funeral etiquette drilled in before they can spell bereavement. For those unable to afford the full trappings, there's always the option to rent mourning clothes, because nothing says respectful grief like a second-hand hatband. By the time your mourning period is officially over, you've spent a small fortune, alienated half your friends who have forgotten what your face looks like under all that tulle, and developed a Pavlovian response to the colour black. And just as you fold away the last veil, someone else dies, and it all begins again. So next time you struggle to find the right words for a condolence card, be grateful you don't need a grief-themed wardrobe, stationery set, and hair jewellery to prove you cared. In the Victorian era, sorrow wasn't just felt, it was marketed, managed, and meticulously accessorized. A gentleman invites you to have your skull fondled and charted, revealing criminal tendencies. Good luck at your next job interview. Welcome to the curious world of Victorian science, where your job prospects, romantic future, and capacity for villainy all come down to the geography of your scalp. Forget resumes or references. Here, A firm handshake is quickly followed by an equally firm poking and prodding of your skull. Meet the phrenologist, part scientist, part showman, and full-time enthusiast for drawing wildly inappropriate conclusions from the bumps on your head. The scene is set in a comfortably cluttered parlour filled with busts, charts, and a man in a waistcoat who introduces himself as Dr. Quibble. You're invited to take a seat. He adjusts his spectacles, rolls out a paper chart covered in mysterious diagrams, and begins what Victorians earnestly call the cranial examination. This involves running his fingers over every lump, ridge, and dent, murmuring to himself as if decoding some arcane map. To you, it feels less like a medical procedure and more like a fortune-telling session with a cold, slightly clammy touch. Phrenology, you see, is the hottest craze in self-improvement. Its premise is simple and simply bonkers. Each bump on your skull corresponds to a specific personality trait. A protrusion above your left ear? That's amativeness? Or a suspicious interest in romance? A dip at the crown? Clearly, you lack veneration and should avoid religious debates. There's a special area for acquisitiveness, how much you like shiny things, combativeness, your tendency to argue, and crucially, secretiveness, which according to Dr. Quibble, makes you an excellent candidate for espionage or petty theft. The results are recorded in exquisite detail. You receive a written report outlining your strengths. You possess great firmness of character, possibly due to a forehead shaped like a church steeple. And your weaknesses, a regrettable swelling in the destructiveness zone, do not lend this person your garden shears. This pseudoscience is both flattering and alarming. Who needs therapy when you can simply check your head for career advice? Victorian families have their children examined in hopes of spotting the next Isaac Newton, or perhaps avoiding the next Jack the Ripper. Employers and police, eager for a shortcut to good judgment, latch on to phrenology like Victorians to a scandal. Job interviews may involve more scalp than CV, and criminals are paraded before phrenologists to have their criminal bumps measured for the newspapers. Never mind upbringing, environment, or actual behaviour. If your skull is a bit lumpy, you could find yourself on the wrong end of a scientific diagnosis and the right end of a career in bricklaying. Naturally, there's a thriving business in phrenological busts, porcelain heads, labelled with all the proper regions, ideal for the mantelpiece or to impress your less sceptical friends. Social gatherings feature bump readings alongside palmistry and séance invitations. For the right price, you can even buy a self-examination kit and spend your evenings fretting over a suspicious swelling above your benevolence area. As time goes on, phrenology is used to justify everything from social climbing to outright discrimination. "It's not my fault I'm bad at math," you might protest. "It's my occipital lobe." Even romantic matches are arranged with an eye, or a hand, to compatible craniums. The only thing more dangerous than a poor report is a glowing one. It's the Victorian version of a LinkedIn endorsement, except you can't grow out a bad review, you can only wear a thicker hat. By the turn of the century, real science begins to nudge phrenology out the door, but not before millions have had their fate decided by the quirks of bone and the whimsy of experts with a fondness for headgear. So next time you're anxious about a job interview or a first date, just be grateful no one is reaching for your skull and a map. In the Victorian era, you really could lose your reputation by a hair. You misbehave, and suddenly it's not just a time out. It's the attic cage, the restraining chair, or the threat of a rest cure involving total isolation. Welcome to the world of Victorian discipline, where the concept of tough love comes with iron bars and a set of keys you'll never see. In an age obsessed with order, obedience, and the prevention of spontaneous female opinions, the line between naughty and in need of professional help is extremely thin and enforced with a frightening array of hardware. If you're a wife who speaks out of turn or a child who fails to doff your cap at the right moment, congratulations. You're now eligible for Victorian behavioural correction, a phrase that means exactly what you hope it doesn't. Let's start with the most notorious. The attic cage. It's as delightful as it sounds. A tiny, locked enclosure hidden away from polite company. For wives, the offence might be hysteria, a catch-all term covering anything from anxiety to assertiveness to failing to laugh at your husband's jokes. For children, it could be willfulness, melancholy, or simply boredom expressed in the wrong room. Into the attic you go, out of sight and, ideally, out of mind, until you've learned your lesson or someone remembers to let you out. Perhaps you're sent to the restraining chair instead. Imagine a wooden chair with leather straps for every limb and a head brace that keeps you perfectly upright. Posture correction meets light medieval torture. Here, you're meant to reflect on your misdeeds, though the only thoughts you're likely to have involve plotting a daring escape. Victorians swear by it. Nothing builds character like total immobilization. There are stories of wives and children left in these chairs for hours, sometimes days, while family life hums on in the next room. If the neighbours ask about the muffled noises from upstairs, just blame it on the plumbing. For the truly incorrigible, there's the infamous rest cure, a treatment so relaxing you'll wonder if you're being punished or preserved in salt. Prescribed mostly for women, the rest cure involves being confined to a bed in total isolation. No books, no conversation, no exercise, and most certainly, no creative outlets. The idea is that overstimulation causes madness. Therefore, zero stimulation must be the key to sanity. In practice, it's the ultimate introvert's nightmare. 4 blank walls, 3 bland meals, and endless hours to contemplate every slightly misshapen doily in your room. It doesn't stop there. There are cribs, basically adult-sized cages, heavy woolen wraps to prevent unladylike fidgeting, and the dreaded soothing syrup to keep particularly vocal children quiet. The goal is simple: total control. If that sounds familiar, it's because the Victorians were masters of creating systems that disguised suffering as care. They called it therapy. You'd probably call it grounds for a lawsuit. The social logic behind all this is both twisted and painfully earnest. Order must be maintained, and anyone who disrupts the domestic status quo must be corrected. If that means a little solitary confinement or the occasional stint in a padded box, so be it. Respectability is everything, and there's no room for backtalk, tantrums, or inconvenient emotions, especially from the young, the female, or anyone not named Edward. Surprisingly, the law is usually on the side of the correctors. Husbands, fathers, and sometimes even schoolmasters have almost total control over discipline. Complaints are rare, and when they do occur, they're met with eye rolls and suggestions to try a firmer hand. The rare case that makes it to the newspapers is treated as a shocking anomaly, not a common reality. Eventually, reformers do begin to question the wisdom of treating emotional distress with lock and key, but until then, countless Victorians grow up with a healthy fear of attics, chairs, and unsupervised rest. So next time you're put in time out, take comfort. At least you're not being strapped to a chair or locked in the attic for your own good. In Victorian England, bad behaviour wasn't just discouraged, it was caged. You linger on a corner for more than 2 minutes. That's loitering, an arrestable offence. The only thing less popular than vagrants. Lawyers who defend them step onto a Victorian street and try to look busy. Not productive, just busy. Because in this age, doing absolutely nothing is the quickest way to find yourself on the wrong side of the law. Loitering, wandering, idling, these are not just frowned upon. They're official crimes, stamped, signed, and strictly enforced by the city's finest. If you don't have somewhere to be, someone will decide where you're going, and that place is usually a cell, a workhouse, or, if you're really unlucky, a trip before the magistrate for a lecture on the virtues of industry. The origins of these vagrancy laws go back centuries, but Victorians have elevated them to an art form. Their goal? To protect the respectable public from the scandalous sight of poverty. Any gathering of the destitute is considered a threat. So is any individual who appears poor and has the nerve to stand still. Police officers are trained to spot loafers and tramps with a hawk-like intensity. armed with a broad set of definitions. If you're carrying all your worldly goods, you're suspicious. If you're waiting for a job that doesn't materialize, you're even more suspicious. And if you dare to nap in a park, you'll wake up to a stern poke and possibly new accommodations in the local jail. It doesn't take much. Pause on a stoop to tie your shoe. Suspicious. Sit down on a curb to rest your feet. Criminal. Linger outside a bakery, dreaming of hot bread. Positively scandalous. Shopkeepers call for police at the sight of anyone loitering with intent. Intent to what, you ask? The answer, apparently, is intent to offend the middle class. It's a system designed to keep poverty invisible, to clear the streets of undesirables, and to remind everyone else that the difference between lawful citizen and lawless vagrant is often just a clean coat and the price of a sandwich. Once you're arrested for the crime of being too poor in public, the process is swift and merciless. You're marched before a magistrate who's heard it all before. Your pleas that you're looking for work, waiting for a friend, or simply enjoying the weather, are met with the classic Victorian shrug, equal parts apathy and moral superiority. Sentences range from a few nights in jail to a stint in the workhouse, where your reward for inactivity is compulsory labour and watery gruel. Repeat offenders risk transportation, a one-way ticket to the colonies, where you can loiter to your heart's content, provided you survive the journey. There are, of course, those who try to fight back. Lawyers brave enough to defend vagrants are a rare breed, viewed with suspicion by the public and thinly disguised contempt by the bench. The newspapers, always eager for a good scapegoat, blame roving bands of homeless men and women for every social ill, from theft to the sudden disappearance of pie cooling on windowsills. Charitable organizations exist, but their help often comes with strings attached, pledges of sobriety, compulsory church attendance, or a bath in water only slightly above freezing. Children fare no better. Orphans and street urchins are swept up along with adults, bundled off to reformatories where they're taught that the only thing worse than being poor is being poor and idle. The message is clear. Keep moving, keep working, and whatever you do, don't let the police catch you standing still. The ideal Victorian citizen is always on the go, even if there's nowhere left to run. At the end of the day, vagrancy laws do little to solve poverty, and everything to hide it. They keep the streets neat, the wealthy comfortable, and the poor out of sight and out of mind. So next time you catch yourself daydreaming on a street corner, remember, in Victorian England, that could be your first step toward a criminal record. Loiter at your own risk. You sit down for dinner, but conversation is forbidden. One squeak and you're banished to the children's table, which, ironically, is the only fun place in the house. Welcome to the Victorian dinner table, where the greatest delicacy served is awkward silence. Forget lively banter or a good-natured family roast. Here, proper means you eat your boiled mutton in near-total quiet, punctuated only by the careful clink of cutlery and the occasional muffled cough. The atmosphere is less family gathering and more ritual observance of the national moment of silence. Laughter, storytelling, and the sharing of even mildly interesting anecdotes are strictly reserved for another century. This isn't just a personal preference, it's a social rule. The more respectable the household, the stricter the silence. Entire etiquette manuals are devoted to the art of not talking while you chew. One errant giggle, one question about the weather, and you risk a glare from mother, or, worse, a subtle clearing of father's throat, a sound so laden with menace it could curdle the custard. The rationale is that conversation leads to disorder. Disorder leads to moral decline, and moral decline leads, eventually, to sitting in the attic cage next to Aunt Hester and her rest cure. Meals are conducted with the solemnity of a court hearing. You wait for the head of the table to begin, never first, never last, and never with any expression that might suggest you enjoy food. Each course is a chance to perfect your 1,000-yard stare and to contemplate the shape of your potatoes. If you're new to the table, you quickly learn the language of raised eyebrows and tiny, pointed coughs. This is passive aggression at its most artful. An entire meal where every sigh, clink, or cutlet is loaded with unspoken meaning. Of course, there are rules within rules. Don't slurp, don't smack. And whatever you do, don't drop your fork. The only thing more scandalous than noise is mess. So you eat with the posture of a nervous flamingo and the caution of a bomb disposal technician. If your stomach dares to growl, you pray the serving maid drops a spoon to cover the sound. Otherwise, you brace yourself for a week of meaningful glances and whispered comments about family standards. Conversation, if allowed, is carefully curated. Acceptable topics include the weather, provided it's bland, the Queen's most recent engagement, provided it's bland, or the virtues of boiled vegetables, provided you are, yourself, bland. Anything resembling wit, sarcasm, or personal opinion is ruthlessly shushed. The goal is a table free of controversy, laughter, or anything that might be remotely memorable. Let us eat in dignified silence. Father might intone, as if it's a form of advanced spiritual meditation rather than a sign of collective social anxiety. The children's table, meanwhile, is a riot. Banished for a giggle or an accidental sneeze, you find yourself among cousins and siblings who know how to have fun. Here, peas become ammunition, and tales of schoolyard mischief are currency. There's laughter, there's chaos, and, most importantly, there's freedom to speak, at least until an adult's shadow darkens the threshold and threatens to restore order with a single, chilling look. Outside the home, the rules are no less bizarre. In boarding schools and country estates, silent meals are a rite of passage. Servants perfect the art of invisibility, gliding in and out without ever breaking the hush. Guests learn quickly, one wrong word, and you'll never be invited back. Or worse, you'll be assigned a seat next to Great Uncle Percival, who hasn't spoken since the Crimean War. By the end of the meal, you're left full of food and unspoken thoughts. Having spent an hour in the company of family, without sharing a single feeling, you excuse yourself with a bow and shuffle away, ready to whisper your true opinions to the dog or the coat rack. So next time you sigh at a loud dinner or an awkward family argument, be grateful for the noise. In Victorian England, the only thing colder than the mutton was the silence that surrounded it. Desperate for cash? The pawnbroker will buy your teeth, perfect for wealthy people who need real dentures. Your smile is now someone else's social asset. Welcome to the most literal form of a winning smile. In the Victorian era, teeth aren't just for chewing, they're cold, hard currency. When rent is due and pockets are empty, a quick trip to the local pawnbroker can solve your immediate financial woes, provided you're willing to part with a few of your pearly whites. Forget cash for gold. This is cash for molars, and business is booming. The process is straightforward, if a little chilling. You arrive at the pawnbroker's, already nervous and maybe rubbing your jaw with growing apprehension. Behind the counter is a man with the bedside manner of a taxidermist and a gleam in his eye that says he's ready to bargain. No need for collateral, just open wide and let him inspect the goods. The going rate depends on age, condition, and general mouth hygiene. Top quality incisors and canines fetch the highest price, while yellowed or well-loved teeth get you a few coins, a sympathetic shrug, and perhaps some unasked-for dental advice. If you're lucky, your teeth are extracted by someone with at least a passing knowledge of anatomy. More often, it's the local barber, or even the pawnbroker himself, using pliers that have seen everything from locks to livestock. Anesthesia is, as usual, a luxury. Perhaps a swig of gin if you're fortunate, or just the steely encouragement of a bystander urging you not to faint. There's blood, there's pain, and there's the ever-present risk of infection. On the plus side, you'll have enough cash for bread, coal, or a decent second-hand pair of boots. Just don't expect to eat anything harder than porridge for a while. Who's buying all these teeth? Enter the well-to-do, whose idea of self-improvement is more hands-on than most. False teeth are a Victorian status symbol, a way to display wealth, sophistication, and the latest advances in questionable dental technology. Ivory, porcelain, and metal are available, but the truly fashionable dentures are real, preferably from someone young, healthy, and unfortunate enough to need money more than molars. The dentist fits them into custom plates, and voila, a dazzling new smile to show off at parties, balls, and uncomfortable close-ups in daguerreotypes. The market is so robust that armies of tooth hunters scour battlefields and graveyards for fresh supplies. Waterloo teeth, plucked from fallen soldiers after the famous battle, are particularly prized, their origins whispered about with a mix of horror and prestige. Owning a set is like having VIP access to both history and hygiene, assuming you can ignore the unsettling backstory. For the poor, selling teeth is both a last resort and a weirdly practical investment strategy. Children are encouraged to take care of their teeth, not for vanity's sake, but because a healthy mouth means a reliable source of emergency funds. Some even plan for the future, spacing out extractions to maximize return over time. It's the only retirement plan that requires you to smile less with every passing year. After the transaction, you join the ranks of the gap-toothed, hiding your new smile behind a hand or a scarf. Eating, speaking, and even laughing are suddenly fraught with self-consciousness. But at least the bills are paid. Until next time. For the wealthy, a new set of gleaming chompers means one more social advantage in a world where appearances are everything. So next time you're tempted to grumble about the price of a filling, remember, at least you're not financing your life one molar at a time. In Victorian England, a smile wasn't just a gesture, it was a commodity, traded on the open market and worn by whoever could afford it. Smile now, pay later, and hope you don't run out of assets before you run out of needs. You peek out the window and spot a baby suspended in a wire cage, hanging off the third-story ledge. Sunlight and fresh London air, but hopefully not gravity. Welcome to Victorian child rearing, where keeping your infant safe and healthy sometimes means dangling them over the city like a particularly vulnerable potted plant. The invention of the baby cage was meant to solve an urban problem. Cramped apartments, no private gardens, and smog so thick you could chew it. Doctors, never ones to say no to a bit of fresh air, insisted that sunlight was essential for babies' growth. And so, necessity, and possibly a mild disregard for basic physics, birthed the health window, a wire box clipped to your window frame, just roomy enough for a squirmy toddler and a parent's mounting anxiety. It's the latest in a long line of questionable Victorian inventions, and it comes with instructions only slightly more reassuring than good luck. The cage, made of stout wire mesh, juts out over the street like a pigeon coop, 3 stories above the passing horse carts and errant street urchins. There's a mattress on the bottom, a padlock for safety, and enough space for your little one to crawl, nap, or practice their 1,000-yard stare. For bonus points, it also allows passers-by to admire your commitment to modern parenting, or to make hasty bets on how long until the next gust of wind. Inside the flat, parents enjoy a moment of relative peace, knowing that their offspring is technically outdoors and unlikely to be trampled by neighbours or suffocated by coal smoke. In theory, the cage is a marvel of progress. A way to give your baby the sunlight and air they'd never get from the gloomy tenements of London. In practice, it's a daily exercise in hope and denial. Mothers glance nervously from the stove to the window, ears cocked for the slightest rattle of wire or the distant shriek of a baby experiencing low-altitude vertigo. And what of the babies themselves? Victorian advertisements promise robustness, rosy cheeks and a hearty constitution, as if suspending your child over traffic is the secret ingredient to lifelong health. In reality, the view from the baby cage is a crash course in city life. Horse-drawn omnibuses, costermongers hawking eels, and the neighbour's laundry flapping dangerously close to your face. If you're lucky, you'll enjoy a bit of sun and maybe a nap. If you're not, there's always the thrill of a passing pigeon or the sudden, thrilling realization that you can see your entire street without supervision. Of course, not everyone is sold. The sight of a baby in a wire box is enough to scandalize visiting relatives and inspire anxious letters to the Times. Grandmothers mutter about the good old days, when children got their sunlight from running wild in the garden and fresh air didn't involve a drop to the pavement. But for city parents, the baby cage is an act of desperation, a compromise between the latest health advice and the terrifying logistics of child safety in a world without car seats, baby gates, or even consistent indoor plumbing. As the years go on, the baby cage becomes a symbol of the era's contradictory spirit, innovative, earnest, and just a little bit unhinged. Safety standards eventually catch up, and parents swap their window cages for prams, playgrounds, and eventually, actual backyards. Still, for a brief, glorious period, nothing says modern parenting like peering out your window and seeing your baby suspended over Victorian London, calmly watching the chaos below. So, next time you hear a modern parenting debate about screen time or gluten, spare a thought for the families who measured success in hours of sunshine and the number of children who made it back inside. In the age of the baby cage, fresh air was a luxury, safety was optional, and every nap was a leap of faith, sometimes literally. You try to write with your left hand, but your teacher straps it down. Victorian logic. Lefties are one step away from the devil, and also, probably, socialism. Welcome to the Victorian classroom, where order and conformity matter far more than individuality, and where your handedness is considered not just an inconvenience, but a threat to society itself. In this world, the left hand isn't just the other hand, it's the suspicious, sinister one. A word that literally means on the left in Latin, and, coincidentally, also means evil if you ask your great-aunt or your village priest. The scene is all too familiar for any left-handed Victorian child. The moment you pick up your slate pencil in your wrong hand, your teacher's eyes narrow with a mix of concern and resolve. There's a tap on your knuckles with a ruler, a gentle warning. The second time, it's not so gentle. Soon enough, you're introduced to the left-hand correction device. A leather strap that pins your left arm to your side, a metal brace, or simply the old-fashioned method of making you sit on your hand until you learn some manners. Why such a fuss? The answer, as with many Victorian anxieties, lies somewhere between religion, folklore, and an unwavering belief in the power of routine. The left hand is the devil's hand. It's unlucky. It's the hand you use to wipe after a visit to the privy, which, to be fair, is a practical reason, just not one you'll find in any etiquette manual. But above all, it's different, and Victorian England does not like different. Schoolrooms are temples of uniformity, and every child must write, eat, and salute with the right hand. It's proper, it's respectable, and it will definitely keep you out of trouble, or so you're told. The correction is more than just physical discomfort. It's a campaign to mould your very self. Teachers and parents alike are convinced that a left-handed child is at risk of moral degeneration, mental instability, or, worst of all, standing out. And in an age obsessed with fitting in, standing out is basically asking for trouble. Lessons become exercises in frustration. Letters slope the wrong way, ink smears across your paper, and you're constantly reminded that your natural instincts are a problem to be fixed. Home isn't much better. Families pride themselves on raising well-adjusted children, which, in practice, means children who can mimic their parents and neighbours as closely as possible. Grandparents mutter about corrupt blood and witch marks. Some relatives whisper that famous criminals were left-handed, which may or may not be true, but is repeated often enough to become gospel. If you dare to protest, you're told you'll thank them later, usually while you're scrubbing ink stains off your chin. It's not just about writing. Left-handed children are forced to eat, sew, and even play games with their non-dominant hand. In art class, your creative spirit is gently redirected toward the right. In music lessons, your grip on the violin bow is corrected until you can no longer tell which end makes the sound. The goal isn't just to change your handwriting, it's to change you. A lucky few rebel, sneaking moments of left-handed scribbling when no one is looking, or growing up to be the eccentric relative who never quite conformed. But for most, the lesson sticks. You grow up right-handed, or at least convincingly so. You learn that survival depends on blending in, even if it means ignoring your own instincts. So, next time you see a left-handed friend flourishing their pen with ease, give them a quiet nod of respect. In Victorian England, it took real courage and a well-developed sense of irony to be left-handed. Here, even your hand preference could mark you as a troublemaker. Remember, if you'd lived back then, you might have been forced to write with the right hand, while secretly plotting your left-handed revenge. You grieve your lost child by commissioning a life-sized mourning doll, dressed in their clothes and displayed in your living room, a conversation piece for all the wrong reasons. Step inside the parlour of Victorian grief, and you'll quickly see that, in this era, letting go is strictly optional. While today's keepsakes might be a photograph or a lock of hair tucked in a locket, the Victorians turned remembrance into an entire interior decorating theme. The centerpiece, the mourning doll, a life-sized, eerily lifelike figure, crafted to represent the dearly departed, propped up in the very seat they once occupied. Friends and neighbours visiting for tea can enjoy a thoughtful chat, their gaze drifting ever so casually toward the glassy eyes of little Emily, who hasn't spoken since Easter because, well, she's mostly sawdust and porcelain now. The logic is as intricate as Victorian etiquette itself. Childhood mortality rates are sky high, so nearly every family is touched by loss. But instead of tucking away their sorrow, families channel it into a curious combination of art, ritual, and emotional endurance. Mourning dolls are commissioned with painstaking accuracy. The same hair colour, the same chubby hands, the same blue dress with the gravy stain no one dared scrub out. Local artisans, equal parts sculptor and therapist, build these figures to specification, sometimes even incorporating real hair or teeth from the child. Yes, really. The effect is uncanny, comforting to some, deeply unsettling to others, and a guaranteed conversation stopper at any gathering. But why stop with dolls? The Victorian era is a golden age of grief merchandise. Mourning rings, brooches, lockets, and even bracelets woven from the deceased's hair are all the rage. Jewelers advertise memorial pieces in the daily papers, promising to preserve your loved one's memory in solid gold, or, if funds are tight, jet and gutta percha. Some families order silhouette portraits or have the child's photograph hand-painted, posed to look as peaceful as possible. Sometimes with their favourite toy. No, you're not imagining things. That teddy bear really is a little too still. If you were truly committed, you might commission a death mask, a plaster cast of your child's face, immortalised in a frozen moment of slumber and sorrow. These masks often join the gallery of family ancestors, displayed with equal pride and melancholy, silently watching generations of children who one hopes fare better. For families with means, there are personalised memorial cards, hand-stitched samplers, and entire albums of memento mori photography, each image a sepia-toned exercise in both denial and devotion. All of this, of course, comes with a side of strict mourning etiquette. For at least a year after a child's passing, you're expected to avoid colour, laughter, and public enjoyment. Your home is draped in black crepe, mirrors are covered, clocks may be stopped at the hour of death, and every visitor is obliged to express the appropriate combination of sympathy and horror upon meeting the mourning doll. The doll becomes both a stand-in for the lost child and a symbol of the family's devotion, proof that, in the endless competition of Victorian grief, you are mourning as hard as anyone possibly could. For some, the practice brings comfort, a way to process loss in a world where death is both omnipresent and rarely discussed in honest terms. For others, it's a macabre performance, a ritual that blurs the line between memory and obsession. Children grow up alongside these silent figures, learning that loss is ever present and that grief, like tea, is best served with ceremony. So the next time you find yourself awkwardly holding a condolence card and wondering what to say, be grateful that modern mourning doesn't require a life-sized effigy in your living room. In Victorian England, every sorrow could be touched, worn, or displayed. and every loss was both heartbreak and home decor. The mourning doll, because sometimes letting go just isn't part of the program. You're jolted awake in the small hours not by nightmares, but by the unmistakable sound of a night soil man collecting the previous day's, personal deposits from beneath your privy. It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. Just try not to make eye contact as your excrement is wheeled past your breakfast table. Welcome to the fragrant underbelly of Victorian urban life, where modern plumbing is still a fantasy, and indoor bathrooms are the mark of only the luckiest or wealthiest households. For everyone else, there's the privy, a wooden throne perched precariously over a pit, located in the backyard or, if you're fancy, attached to the rear of your tenement. And beneath this marvel of sanitation lies a growing problem: yesterday's everything. When the pit fills up, you can either start digging a new hole, not recommended for small gardens, or you call in the professionals, the night soil men. These unsung heroes of hygiene operate strictly after dark. By law, and more importantly, by social contract, the removal of human waste is not something you do in broad daylight. Under the cover of darkness, teams of men trundle through narrow alleyways, pushing carts and shouldering buckets brimming with what the polite pamphlets call night soil. It's an operation conducted with stealth and speed. Open the hatch, shovel, scoop, pour, and pray the neighbours don't peek out the window. If they do, you avoid eye contact and hope everyone can just pretend this is, in fact, a delivery of fresh bread. The gear is minimal: heavy boots, thick aprons, and a nose for business. The work is grueling, and the pay is meagre. But for many, it's the only thing standing between their families and the workhouse. Night soil men develop a reputation for toughness, a keen sense of direction, useful when every street corner looks and smells the same, and a sort of grim camaraderie that comes from facing the worst of humanity's byproducts together. For their trouble, they're shunned in daylight hours, rarely welcomed in polite company, and mostly paid in coins that have definitely not been cleaned. The city depends on them, though nobody likes to admit it. Without the nightly parade of buckets and barrels, urban life would grind to a literal halt. The alternative? Overflowing pits, alleys awash with effluent, and outbreaks of cholera that sweep through neighbourhoods faster than a rumour about the vicar's new housemaid. When the great stink of 1858 makes the Thames smell so bad Parliament can barely function, suddenly the night soil problem becomes the talk of the town, and even the Queen herself starts to advocate for sewers. But until the grand day of indoor plumbing arrives, the ritual continues. Families lie awake, counting the creaks of the night soil cart and the soft, sloshing symphony outside their windows. In the morning, you hope the men have done a thorough job. You'll know if they haven't by the sudden appearance of flies and a pervasive sense of dread at breakfast. Just don't ask too many questions about where last night's cargo ends up. Spoiler, it's probably helping fertilise the cabbages you'll eat next week. The Victorian attitude toward the night soil men is a blend of gratitude, embarrassment, and willful ignorance. Children are warned not to stare. Housewives tip the men in silence. Husbands pretend the whole business is beneath them until their own pit overflows and desperation wins out over dignity. The job is immortalised in cartoons and snide jokes, but without these midnight labourers, city life would be unlivable. So next time you flush your toilet and think nothing of it, spare a grateful thought for the night soil men, those shadowy figures who risked ruin and ridicule to keep Victorian cities just this side of habitable. In a world without pipes or privacy, sanitation was a team effort, conducted one bucket at a time under the forgiving cover of moonlight. You're feeling anxious, nervous, or just overwhelmed by life and loud trousers. A doctor diagnoses you with nerves and prescribes a course of absolute silence, cold baths, and not talking about your feelings for the next decade. Therapy is for people with time, and not enough cousins to gossip with. Welcome to Victorian mental health care, where the stiff upper lip is more than just a metaphor, it's a state-mandated lifestyle. In this era, having emotions is dangerous, but showing them is practically criminal. If you feel the weight of the world pressing down on you, the correct response isn't to reach out for help. No, you must power through with the aid of fashionable stoicism, as much tea as your bladder can manage, and perhaps, if things get truly dire, a brisk walk in the rain while humming something funereal. Let's say you admit you're anxious or low. Perhaps you're haunted by troubling dreams, or your appetite has vanished along with your will to get out of bed. This is nerves, a diagnosis as vague as it is universal. Men are said to suffer melancholia or nervous exhaustion. Women are accused of hysteria, female weakness, or overtaxed sensibility. The cure is, of course, a matter of suppressing symptoms rather than addressing them. The medical wisdom of the time prescribes do less, talk less, and above all, feel less. The treatments start innocently enough. Plenty of rest, a change of air, perhaps a trip to the seaside where the bracing wind will either clear your mind or freeze it solid. But the real Victorian favourite is silence, literal and emotional. You're expected to avoid all stimulating conversation. If you must speak, keep it to neutral topics like the weather or the Queen's most recent bonnet. Books, if allowed, are chosen for their total lack of drama. Poetry is suspect. Novels are positively dangerous. Therapy, as we understand it, is unheard of. The closest you might get is a family member having a quiet word and suggesting that you try being less sensitive, an intervention that somehow leaves you feeling both more alone and less understood. Should you persist in expressing your feelings, your doctor may prescribe the rest cure, which involves weeks of bed rest, bland food, and the company of one's own spiraling thoughts. Exercise is discouraged. Socializing is strictly controlled. Too much stimulation is blamed for your condition, so the solution is to remove all stimulation, possibly including sunlight. Men are not immune. Soldiers returning from the horrors of colonial wars, or simply from the daily battle of city life, are told to buck up, think of England, and get back on the horse, sometimes literally. Any cracks in the emotional armour are patched over with lectures on manliness and duty, while any true struggle is quietly swept under the imported Turkish carpet. For women, the situation is even more fraught. A simple case of heartbreak or frustration can land you in the doctor's office, where the diagnosis of hysteria is a catch-all for any behaviour not sufficiently ladylike. Treatment options range from cold baths and mustard plasters to enforced seclusion or, in extreme cases, a stint in the local asylum, where your chances of feeling better are about as good as your chances of winning the lottery. Family and friends play their part with the subtlety of a brass band. Pull yourself together. It's just nerves. Have you tried not worrying? The culture of not talking about feelings is so deeply ingrained that any attempt at emotional honesty is met with awkward coughs and quick changes of subject. If things get especially bad, you might be sent away to the country for a while, your troubles erased as tidily as a misspelled name in the family Bible. And so, Victorian England remains a landscape of repressed emotions, stoic facades, and anxiety that seeps out only in the form of digestive complaints or lengthy, mournful letters to the Times. So next time you feel overwhelmed and someone says, "Don't bottle it up," be grateful you're not in a world where bottling it up was the only treatment plan. In the Victorian era, the cure for shell shock was simple. Don't mention it, and if you must, at least have the decency to do it in French. It's bath day, finally, and you reach for your beauty products. Instead of lotion, you slather on a thick layer of sheep fat, guaranteed to keep your skin soft, shiny, and slightly mutton-scented. Bonus: you're now waterproof and very appealing to the neighbourhood stray dogs. Welcome to the world of Victorian personal care, where luxury is relative and natural ingredients means a trip to the butcher rather than the apothecary. Forget about jojoba oil, shea butter, or rosehip serum. If you want soft skin, you'll be reaching for a tub of rendered mutton fat, the closest thing this era has to a miracle cream. You scoop out a handful of the semi-solid waxy goo, brace yourself, and start rubbing it into your elbows, knees, and whatever other bits have survived the weekly scrub. Why mutton fat, you ask? The answer, as always, is necessity. Victorian winters are harsh, indoor heating is a distant fantasy, and soap is often so caustic it could double as a paint stripper. Your skin cracks, flakes, and begs for mercy. Enter Suet, the working person's answer to both dry skin and, if you're lucky, a modest glow. Unlike fancy oils imported at great expense, mutton fat is readily available, cheap, and, after a little boiling, not entirely unpleasant to the touch, provided you ignore the smell. Applying it is an art and a gamble. Too thin a layer, and you're as dry as before. Too thick, and you risk leaving greasy prints on every surface you touch for the next week. Rubbing it in, you try not to think about the source. Some swear by beef tallow, but sheep are everywhere, and mutton fat is said to have superior emollient properties. In reality, it just means you smell like the Sunday roast, an aroma that lingers long after bath day is over. Scented products do exist, if you're rich. The upper crust have access to imported colognes, almond oil, and beeswax, dabbing their wrists with lavender and rosewater between bouts of fainting. The rest of us improvise. Maybe you add a sprig of rosemary, or, if you're feeling extravagant, a drop of lemon essence filched from the kitchen. Most, though, just get used to smelling faintly of stew and counting themselves lucky if the local stray dogs don't follow them home, noses twitching with appreciation. Let's talk about side effects. Your skin, while theoretically softened, is now both shiny and surprisingly slick. Wearing nice clothes after moisturizing is a risk. A favorite dress can end up looking like you wrestled a sheep and lost. On the plus side, your waterproof rating has gone up. Victorian children sent out in the rain return home as beading and glossy as a well-oiled boot. If you slip on the stairs, it's not the mutton fat's fault, it's just an unexpected spa treatment for the banisters. There's also the minor issue of storage. Mutton fat must be kept cool, or it melts and runs, turning your beauty product into a small domestic disaster. In winter, it hardens into a block, requiring a butter knife to scoop it out. In summer, it's a race against time and flies to use it before it becomes a petri dish. Either way, it's best to apply at night and sleep on a towel you're willing to part with by spring. Of course, some family members are less enthusiastic. Partners may protest at bedtime, "Why does the pillow smell like soup?" And babies sometimes emerge from their cots looking slightly breaded. Even the cat is wary. But you can't argue with results. In a land of cracked hands and relentless wind, shiny skin is a mark of resourcefulness and commitment to personal hygiene, such as it is. So next time you open your bathroom cabinet and choose between coconut oil and unscented lotion, remember, your Victorian ancestors got by with nothing but animal fat, determination, and the hope that everyone else smelled just as odd. Self-care wasn't always glamorous, but at least it kept your elbows shiny and your enemies at nose's length. You notice your neighbour bricking up their windows in a panic, not because of burglars, but to avoid the window tax. More sunlight means more money owed. So, you squint by candlelight, developing both rickets and a healthy respect for creative accounting. Welcome to the curious world of the Victorian window tax, where letting in a little extra daylight could lighten your purse more than your living room. Forget modern worries about rising electricity bills. Here, it's the sun itself that comes at a premium. The government, always on the lookout for new sources of revenue, hits upon the obvious solution: tax every window in your house. The result? A patchwork cityscape of bricked-up panes, dim parlours, and a population with the collective vitamin D levels of a cave salamander. This tax, introduced in the 17th century and still going strong through much of the 1800s, turns architecture into an act of protest. If you're poor, you have a choice: pay up or sacrifice your already limited access to daylight. Homeowners all over England scramble to minimise their tax bill, hiring bricklayers to seal up perfectly good windows and create the most depressing home renovations in history. It's the only time in history when someone could proudly say, "My house is darker than yours," and mean it as a financial triumph. The upper classes, of course, keep their windows and simply pay the tax, reveling in sunbeams and social superiority. Their well-lit drawing rooms are both a mark of status and a subtle way to flaunt their disposable income. For everyone else, there's ingenuity. Fake windows painted onto brickwork, mirrors angled to bounce a little extra light through narrow slits, and a thriving market for glass panels that could be popped in or out depending on who was doing the counting. The effects on daily life are immediate and, in retrospect, just a bit tragic. You read your books by candlelight, stoop over your sewing, and spend most of your day shuffling from one gloomy room to another. Eye strain is as common as teacups. Children learn their lessons squinting at their primers, and every cough is met with the nervous speculation that someone is developing consumption, the era's all-purpose diagnosis for anyone who looks a little pale. Rickets, caused by a lack of sunlight, becomes a national affliction. Doctors recommend fresh air and sunlight, but good luck finding either in a house with more brick than glass. The architectural legacy of the window tax is hard to miss. Walk down any Victorian street and count the bricked-up window spaces, whole rows of half-houses staring blankly at the world, as if perpetually frowning at their own lack of vitamin D. Even grand townhouses sometimes sport odd, mismatched facades, testaments to the annual scramble before the tax assessor's visit. Landlords find creative loopholes, while tenants try to negotiate for the rare sunny room, usually at a premium. The law also has its social quirks. Boarding houses and apartment buildings end up with communal light wells, vertical shafts designed to funnel the bare minimum of daylight into the building's dark heart, sometimes doubling as handy rubbish chutes. Parties in well-lit rooms become a mark of exclusivity. Invitations to sun parlours are coveted. Some even speculate that the rise of the British pub owes as much to the lack of home lighting as it does to the quality of the ale. After all, it's easier to see your friends and your pint in a public house than at home. Eventually, health advocates and reformers campaign against the window tax, arguing that it's turning the nation into a society of troglodytes. The tax is finally repealed in the mid-19th century, and people celebrate by knocking through old brickwork, rediscovering their own gardens, and, presumably, squinting at the brightness for months. But the scars remain, both architectural and literal. So next time you throw open your windows and bask in the sun, take a moment to be grateful. In Victorian England, sunlight was a luxury, natural light was taxable, and creative accounting was the only way to avoid living life by candle and guesswork. So here we are at the end of our peculiar Victorian evening, a night spent dodging chamber pots, corset laces, and baby cages, all while trying not to offend a phrenologist or accidentally get arrested for standing in one place too long. Take a moment as you settle into your soft, suspiciously crumb-free bed to appreciate the simple modern miracles around you. Central heating, child-free chimneys, and the freedom to eat dinner without anyone selling your teeth or silencing your laughter with a stern look. Maybe you'll even dream of a world where you can sit on a bench without a constable whisking you away for loitering in public with an untrustworthy face. Let's spare a grateful thought for our Victorian ancestors, their grit, their optimism, and their sheer ability to survive a time when bathing was dangerous, beauty was toxic, and a dinner party was an exercise in emotional repression and silent chewing. They made it through an era where nearly every solution involved arsenic, mutton fat, or sending your children somewhere dark, cramped, and technically on fire. So tonight, as you close your eyes and drift towards sleep, whisper a quiet thank you to those who endured public hangings, soot, and windowless parlours, just so we could one day enjoy pyjamas and the miracle of toothpaste. Because history, at its worst, is a gentle reminder that people are stubborn, hopeful, and above all, absolutely ridiculous. Sleep well, and may your dreams be free of morning dolls, anti-masturbation myths, and anyone trying to sell you a side of arsenic with your morning tea. Good night.